My name is Samantha. I'm 34 years old. I used to be an architecture student in New York, but now I live in a small town in Oregon with my mother. It's been 12 years since I gave up all my dreams to stay by her side after my father died. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought if I sacrificed enough, that love would be returned. But at my mother's 60th birthday party, in the middle of clinking glasses, laughter, and candles not yet lit on the cake, she calmly looked at me and then turned to our relatives. The greatest gift my daughter could give me is to leave my life tonight. No one reacted. No one asked why. Not a single sympathetic glance came my way. I just stood frozen, still holding the cake knife in midair. In that moment, I realized I was never loved. I was only needed when someone needed a person to exploit. If you've ever been turned away by your own family, treated like a sacrifice without anyone asking if you were okay, leave a comment below. I want to hear your story. Like this video, subscribe to the channel if you've ever felt forgotten in the very home you grew up in. And if you think it stopped at that cruel statement at the party, no, things grew much darker. I will tell you, step by step, how I was erased from my own life and how I took it back. I left the party in silence. No one followed. No hand reached out to stop me. The sound of the door closing behind me felt like the final bolt, sealing the gate that had imprisoned me for 12 years in duty, in resignation, in the illusion that family bonds could be bought with sacrifice. I stood in the rose garden my mother planted, the blossoms glowing under the porch light. Everything looked peaceful as always except me, shattered inside. I had lived here, in the house my father left us, since the day my mother called me in panic. "Your father is gone. I can't do this alone. You have to come back." At that time, I was in my final year of architecture school in New York. I had a full scholarship. My professor had just introduced me to a prestigious design studio in Manhattan. I already had plans for my thesis project, for my future. But with just one sentence from my mother, I packed up, requested a leave of absence, and bought a plane ticket back to Oregon. I didn't take much with me. I thought it would only be for a short while, just a few months until she recovered, until life settled down, then I would return. No one could have guessed those months would stretch into more than a decade. When I came back, the house was unbearably empty. My father had passed just 3 days before. My mother still wore black, her eyes swollen, sitting motionless in the old armchair. I held her, believing I could help her stand strong again. But I didn't realize that from that moment, I had been placed into a mold she had already prepared. I cooked, did laundry, took her to doctors, managed prescriptions, fixed wiring, tended the garden. I worked part-time at the town library for extra income, while most expenses were covered by my father's life insurance, which I assumed my mother used to maintain the household. But she often reminded me, "You barely earn anything, so at least you can help me out here." At first, I thought it was temporary. I kept my design books nearby, still jotted down ideas when I could, still dreamed of going back to school. But as days turned into months, every time I mentioned New York, my mother would weaken, sighing, "You'd leave me? I have no one else." So I stayed. For 12 years, I planted trees, cooked, patched the roof when it leaked. My mother never worked again, but she lived comfortably. She went to the spa every month, had a bridge group every week, often invited them home for dinners, and I was always in the kitchen. I once thought about renting a small apartment downtown, but she told me if I left, she wouldn't survive. I once planned to set up a stand, tiny architecture studio in the garage. She said the noise from printers and tools would give her headaches. And I gave in again. Little by little, I disappeared from my own life. Old friends stopped reaching out. Relationships never lasted because I always had to get home to take care of Mom. I learned to speak less, to avoid conflict, to live under her invisible rules. No kitchen lights after 10 p.m., no long hot showers, Don't touch food saved for her guests. Worst of all, I learned not to ask for anything. Not to ask why nothing in the house was mine except for my bed and a small dresser. Not to ask why I was the only one laboring, while everything remained in her name. Sometimes I looked in the mirror, trying to imagine the face I once had in New York, the face of a student full of energy, passionately talking about shapes, light, open spaces. Now I only saw a quiet woman with hunched shoulders, hands rough from dishes, mowing, scrubbing tiles. I always told myself, she's the only family I have left. If I don't take care of her, who will? If I don't sacrifice, who else would? I convinced myself of this for years, until that night. The night she stood before relatives at the birthday party I had organized and cooked for, and declared in front of everyone, "The greatest gift my daughter could give me is to leave my life tonight." I had nothing left to say. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't smash a glass like in the movies. I simply stepped into the garden, breathing in the cold night, slowly reflecting on her words. I had given up an entire life for someone who now told me to my face that my existence was a burden. I stood still among the scent of roses, roses she adored, which I planted last year after she admired the white variety at the neighbor's. She never thanked me, but I planted them anyway. Do we sometimes try so hard to live well, only to be slapped with cruelty in return? Have you ever given up something enormous for your family? Have you ever lived in a house and felt like a stranger inside it? If you know that feeling, leave a comment below. I want to read every word. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest. Sunlight came through the curtains, falling across the familiar creases of the old blanket. I lay there for a long time, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand why her words had left me so hollow. I could still hear her voice in my head, steady, casual, like reading a recipe. No hesitation, no regret. Not just rejection, but a declaration, an eviction notice. I got up, brewed a weak coffee, and sat on the porch steps. Neighbors were already out. Mrs. Louise from across the street was watering her carnations, and Mr. Franklin was backing out of his garage. She saw me, waved cheerfully. "Good morning, Samantha," she called. "Your mom went to the spa?" I saw her drive off earlier. I nodded, gripping my cup tighter. On a day like this, a massage must feel wonderful. I smiled politely, but inside I was empty. I didn't remember her saying she'd be out this morning, and honestly, I didn't know where the money for these weekly spa trips came from. Lately, little details stopped adding up. She had more jewelry, more new coats, and seemed to go away with friends nearly every weekend. They called them getaways, to seaside resorts or wellness hotels. One day, I saw an expensive serum in the bathroom. When I asked, she shrugged. "A friend gave it to me. Didn't cost a dime." The next week, another jar of cream. By the third time, I pressed harder. "Where did you get the money for these?" "Don't worry about it," she replied. "It's from my savings. Back when your dad was alive, he left quite a bit. I deserve to enjoy some of it." I didn't push further, but something inside me shifted. Since Dad passed, I had been paying the utilities, property tax, and insurance. My library job didn't pay much, but I scraped by. Each month, I kept a little for food, then sent the rest into our joint account for household use. I once thought that was practical, simple, but now I started to question it. I remembered the day I got a flat tire driving back from the library. I called home and she said curtly, "The car's old, walk if you must. If you want it fixed, pay for it yourself." I emptied my wallet, pulled from my tiny personal account, skipped lunch to cover the bill. That weekend, she posted photos from an expensive Italian restaurant in the next town. New dress, styled hair, a silver ring I'd never seen. I said nothing, just pulled the blanket tighter that night. I'm not envious. I never begrudged her small luxuries. But the inconsistencies grew too sharp to ignore. One evening, I saw her scrolling on her phone, booking a suite in Bend. "Where are you going?" I asked. "With friends." "Don't worry, I'm not touching your money." I stayed silent. Our bills came from the joint account, but I had never checked the statements, partly because I trusted her, partly because I feared if I looked, I'd lose the last excuse to stay. I started noticing more. Receipts from high-end fashion stores in the trash, empty perfume boxes stuffed under the sink, a bottom drawer full of brand new handbags, tags still attached. I once offered gently, "Do you want me to help with budgeting? The bills have been heavy lately." She sneered. "Are you lecturing me now? I'm spending my money. If you can't afford it, just admit it." Her words cut deep. I had spent 12 years covering every bill, every small debt. I hadn't traveled, bought clothes, or eaten out just to keep us afloat. And she called me the one who couldn't afford it? That night, I picked up my phone, logged into the bank app, ready to check everything one more time just to be sure. But my hand froze on the login screen. I was terrified that if I looked, I could never return to my old life. I was afraid that if the numbers didn't match, I wouldn't be able to pretend I didn't know. I shut off the screen and put the phone down. I still didn't dare to verify it. But inside, things were no longer the same, and I knew I couldn't keep closing my eyes much longer. 3 days after the birthday party, I went to the bank with a simple reason, or at least that's how it started. I told myself I only wanted to ask about savings account interest rates. After what I'd seen and heard, I felt a growing need to take control of what little finances I had left for myself. I wasn't going by feelings. I wanted numbers. The branch was right in the middle of town. The teller was a middle-aged woman named Carol, someone I'd bumped into a few times at the supermarket. We exchanged small talk, then I pulled out my card and ID, asking for a detailed statement of the joint account for the past 12 months. Carol nodded, her fingers gliding quickly over the keyboard. The room smelled faintly of fresh paper and coffee from the machine in the corner. Only 2 other customers were waiting. It was so quiet I could hear the soft whirring of the printer. "Do you want a full statement, or just a summary?" Carol asked without looking up. "The more detail, the better." She nodded again. A few minutes later, Carol retrieved a thick stack from the printer and set it down between us. "There have been several large transfers over the past year. I highlighted them so they're easier to track." I thanked her and began scanning the pages. At first, everything looked normal. Utility bills, the grocery store, the pharmacy. Then I saw a repeating transaction, every month ranging between $700 and $1,200. The description read, "Internal transfer." I frowned. "Transferred to where?" Carol pulled the screen closer, typed a few commands. "Another account. Also at this branch. Under the name Vivian Clark." I looked up. "Just in. Her name?" "Yes." I sat there frozen. A chill ran down my spine. "Am I allowed to see details?" "Not if you're not listed as a joint owner." "Sorry." I took a deep breath, forcing my voice steady. "Do these transfers require confirmation?" "They're all signed." "I can print the scanned copies if you want." "Please do." Carol disappeared behind the glass, then returned with another stack. I stared at the signatures. They looked familiar, but something was off. The curve of the S was too loose, the loop on the A too sharp. I'd signed my name thousands of times. I never wrote like that. "Do you see a problem?" Carol asked gently. "I didn't sign these." She hesitated. "Do you want to file a claim?" "Yes. I need copies of every transfer into that account with the signatures. And I want to file a report for forgery." Her expression grew serious. "We have a process for that. I'll get you the forms to submit to our legal department." "But there's something else." I looked up. "Vivian was here about 3 weeks ago. I remember it. She told us you agreed to all joint expenses, including her right to withdraw directly." I didn't answer. My throat was dry. My heart raced like I'd just been dragged into a chess game where the other player had already moved several steps ahead. I signed the complaint form. Then Carol asked if I wanted to check for loans under my name, just in case. I hesitated, then nodded. She typed again, her eyes locked on the screen for a long time. Is something wrong? I need to confirm. There are 3 small loans. One from 4 months ago, one from last February, and one about 18 months back. All opened here? She nodded. And the borrower name is me? Yes. Your name, your social security number, your home address. She paused. Each time, someone else signed as legal support. My ears rang. How much in total? Just under $22,000, including interest. I clenched my fists, nails digging into my palms. I've never opened a single loan. Carol lowered her voice. You'll need to go to the legal office. And you should probably speak to an attorney. I thanked her, grabbed the stack of papers, and walked out of the bank in a haze. The wind outside had picked up. I sat in my car with the doors locked, exhaling deeply. For years, I had stepped back, given in, believing that love could justify the price I paid. But numbers on paper don't lie. And now they were telling me what I'd never dared say aloud. I drove home like someone just waking from a long dream. Everything looked familiar, the stone-paved road winding past maples, the white fence I'd painted last spring, but it all felt foreign. Each time I stepped onto the porch, I felt more like a tenant than a daughter. I placed the bank papers on the dining table and stared at them for a long time. Every number, every forged signature was proof. I had no control over the life I was living. Something flickered inside me, not anger yet, not rebellion, but a clarity I'd never had. I went upstairs and entered my mother's room while she was at her Wednesday wellness session. The room bore the marks of someone used to privilege. Drawers full of silk handkerchiefs, perfume bottles lined across the vanity, stacks of glossy magazines. I opened every drawer carefully, as though sorting through my own history. At the bottom of a large wooden chest beside the bed, I found a worn brown folder labeled Property, House, and Land. I sat on the floor and opened it. The older documents listed my father, Gerald Clark, as the primary owner, but the top sheet, a newer one, was titled Property Transfer Notice. Only one name remained, Vivian Clark. Below was a line of text. Full ownership transferred in 2016, with mutual agreement of both parties. I gripped the paper, my chest pounding. That was the year I'd been sick with severe gastritis, out of work for nearly 2 months, barely leaving the house. I had never signed any transfer. Digging deeper, I found a folded note tucked in. Will, backup copy. My breath caught. Inside was a photocopy of my father's will, written 3 months before he died. It stated clearly, the house was to be co-owned by my mother and me. In addition, he left me a separate savings of nearly $50,000 in an education trust for Samantha, so my daughter can continue her studies if I'm no longer here. I ran my fingers over the words. It felt like an embrace from beyond, a final message that never reached me. I clutched the folder and went back to my room, closing the door. I didn't sleep that night. I wrote everything in a notebook. Dates, transfers, forged signatures, the photocopied will. I photographed each page, saved them on a hard drive in my phone. The next morning, I searched for the office of Richard Coleman, our longtime family lawyer. His office was in a converted old house on the south side of town. I didn't have an appointment, but when his secretary heard my name, she let me in. Mr. Coleman looked older than I remembered, but his eyes were sharp, his voice steady. I'm Samantha Clark, Gerald's daughter. He nodded. I remember. He spoke proudly of you studying architecture. I set the folder on his desk. I found a photocopy of my father's will. Is there an original? He was silent, then stood, opened a heavy file drawer, and pulled out a worn folder. I shouldn't have kept this, he said, placing it before me. but something told me not to destroy my backup. Gerald left everything very clearly. I opened it, the original will, fully notarized, with signatures and seals. After the funeral, he continued, your mother came here. She said you weren't capable of handling finances. She asked to void the file, said she'd reorganize everything. Was she allowed to do that? Not if you objected then. But since you didn't, the authority defaulted to her. I sat in silence, hands on the folder, feeling its weight like stone. Everything had been decided years ago without me. Can I get a certified copy? Of course. I'll sign it. Take it to any attorney you consult. I thanked him and left. On the drive back, puzzle pieces fell into place. Her silence whenever I asked about money, her control of the mail, the way she made me believe I was helpless without her. None of it was chance. It had all been arranged long ago. 2 weeks after my visit with Mr. Coleman, the house felt strange. There were no arguments, no shouting, but I could sense something crawling in the air. My mother had grown quieter. She no longer complained when I came home late. She no longer questioned me when I wrote in my notebook. Instead, she smiled faintly, called me busy girl, poured tea, and watched me with eyes that pretended to be gentle. I used to think I'd learned to read her expressions after all these years. But now I understood I had only seen what she allowed, just as she had hugged me after my father's death and whispered not to leave. Just as she had touched my forehead whenever I said I felt sick, insisting, "You're just tired imagining things." And then it happened. That night, I got home late in the drizzle. I wiped my shoes on the mat, went upstairs to hang my coat. But when I opened my drawer, the one holding my personal documents, diploma, birth certificate, passport, it had been rifled through. I bent down, checking each folder. My old admission letter from the architecture program in New York was gone. My passport was missing. The transcript copies and interior design certifications I'd earned were nowhere. I walked to the kitchen, steadying my voice. "Mom, did you go into my room?" She was standing at the sink, washing a glass slowly. "No, why?" "My file drawer was tampered with. Some important things are gone." She paused for just a second, then kept washing. "You probably misplaced them again. I've kept them in the same spot for 6 years." She set the glass down. "Your memory really has been slipping. I told you already. You're overworked. The other day, you put salt in the fridge, a pencil in the microwave." I looked at her, no longer confused. "You think I'm losing control, don't you?" "I don't think anything. I just worry." The next morning, I caught her whispering with Aunt Grace in the backyard. They stopped talking the moment I stepped out, but I'd already heard fragments. "She's not the same anymore, forgetful. Maybe she needs professional help." The following day, I stopped by the town market to pick up some vegetables. The cashier glanced at me nervously and spoke in a low voice. "Your mom came in this morning asking if I'd seen you drop your wallet. She said your memory's been failing lately." I smiled faintly, said nothing, but my grip on the basket handle turned my knuckles white. Inside, I heard it loud and clear. My mother was carefully building a new image of me, a woman unstable, forgetful, difficult to manage, someone who needed supervision. When I got home, there was a small envelope in the mailbox with no sender listed. Inside was a flyer for a neurological treatment center in Salem, with a thick red line under the section, "Programs for Adults Showing Early Memory Loss." I didn't say anything to her. I locked that paper away in a drawer with the bank statements, Coleman's files, and the report I'd started writing for a lawyer. That night, I video called Lucas, my cousin, Uncle Robert's son. We used to be close before I moved back in with my mother. Lately, he'd been distant. "Lucas, do you have a moment? I need to ask you something." His face appeared on the screen, his expression guarded. "Yeah, what's going on? Have you heard my mom say anything lately? About my mental health, for example?" He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, she said you've been Forgetful, sometimes rambling, muttering to yourself. Do you believe it? Lucas stared at me on the screen for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Honestly, I'm not sure. But people have been talking. Aunt Grace said you seemed different. I closed my eyes for a moment. I'm completely clear-headed. I'm being slandered. For what reason? I didn't answer right away. I reached for a stack of papers on my desk and held them up to the camera. I have proof she forged my signature, moved money, took property, and now she's staging a psychological play to destroy my credibility. Lucas stayed silent. His face stiffened. He looked down, then back at me. I need time to think. I nodded, speaking softly. I don't need you to take sides right now. I just need you to hear me. The call ended. I sat in the small room for a long time, cold wind seeping through the window crack. My father's house, the place I thought was my last safe haven, was turning into a stage. And I was the actor shoved into a role I never chose. The next afternoon, after watering the lavender pots on the porch, Mrs. Elaine Parker from across the street came over, carrying a basket of freshly picked apples. She was in her 70s, widowed for nearly 20 years, living alone with her fat gray cat named Murphy. I'd known her since my first days here. She wasn't nosy, but she noticed everything. In a small town where gossip spread faster than wind, she was one of the few who never spoke a careless word. She set the basket down on the step, studied me for a long while, then spoke. I need to tell you something, but not out here. Let's go inside. I nodded, opened the door, and let her into the kitchen. She sat, pulled a folded piece of paper from her coat pocket, and slid it across the table. I opened it. The shaky handwriting was clear. I heard your mother say she'll send you to a psychiatric hospital. Be careful. Don't let her trick you. I looked up, my throat tightening. You're wondering what I heard? Elaine said, repeating the question I hadn't managed to ask. Yesterday, Vivian came to my house. She spoke softly, asked if I'd seen you wandering the yard at night, forgetting names of objects. She said you were paranoid. Then she asked if I knew of any reputable psychiatric facilities nearby. I froze. Do you think she's serious? Elaine nodded slightly, her eyes sharp. I've lived in this town nearly my whole life, dear. I can tell when someone's speaking from worry and when they're planning a move. Yesterday, she wasn't a worried mother. She was laying the groundwork. I stayed silent. Elaine sighed. I don't interfere in other people's families. But I also can't look away when I see someone being pushed to the edge. Do you have documents? Proof? Anything that shows you're not what they're painting you as? I nodded, went to the cabinet under the sink, and pulled out the folder I'd carefully hidden for days. Bank statements, forged signatures, my father's will, even loan documents fraudulently under my name. Elaine skimmed through them, her face tightening with shock. You need a lawyer. That's what I'm planning. Then do it now. Don't wait until they file paperwork in court. By then, you could be declared legally incompetent. That afternoon, I searched online for attorneys in Salem and Portland. I needed someone not just skilled in law, but experienced in financial abuse within families. After reading reviews and profiles, one name caught my eye, Daniel Harris. He'd worked in the Marion County Prosecutor's Office before starting his own firm. Several articles mentioned his track record in defending victims of financial exploitation, especially within family relationships. I called. His secretary scheduled me for the next morning. Daniel's office was in a modest red brick building with no flashy sign. When I walked in, he was making coffee, hair slightly messy from the wind, sleeves rolled up, a faint scar visible on his wrist. His face was open, steady without being harsh. I handed him the folder. He read in silence for 20 minutes, nodding occasionally. When he finished, he looked up. You've done thorough work. This isn't a series of small mistakes, it's organized behavior. I asked, What do you think can be done? If we can prove the signatures were forged, that property transfers happened without consent, and especially if there's evidence she's preparing to have you committed, we'll have enough grounds to strike back. Not just to protect your assets, but to restore your legal control. I sat still, his words like an unfamiliar but welcome breeze. But he paused, locking eyes with me. You need to be ready. Once we file, your mother will fight hard. I'm not afraid. It's not just about fear, it's about resolve. She won't back down easily. But if we follow procedure carefully, I believe you'll win. He sat straighter, opened his laptop. First steps: change your bank passwords, check your credit, request full statements for anything in your name, and put a lock on your bedroom. Don't let anyone near your documents again. I nodded. Leaving his office, I felt like I was stepping onto an entirely new path. No longer the shadow behind a closed door, waiting for others to decide my life. I stepped out into the evening light, the sun brushing my hair with a gentle glow. Driving home, I thought of Elaine, of her firm gaze as she handed me that note. I thought of Daniel, the lawyer, who didn't doubt my words for a second. And I realized that amid all the losses, I still had something: priceless people who saw the truth in me when the world tried to deny it. That weekend, I received a message from Aunt Grace. Your mom wants to host a family meeting at the house. Saturday, 3 p.m. Everyone will be there. I think you should come. I didn't reply right away. Setting the phone down, I sat at the window, staring at the backyard bathed in golden light. Something in the way she wrote, "You should come," set me on edge. It didn't feel like an invitation, it felt like a summons. On Saturday morning, Daniel arrived early. He wore a slate gray shirt, a simple jacket, and carried a large case. We sat in the living room, reviewing every piece of evidence. The bank statements, the fraudulent transfers, the reports from the bank, Coleman's notarized confirmation, all carefully numbered and organized. I won't speak for you, Daniel said, calm and steady. But I'll stand beside you, and when needed, I'll make the legal case clear. I nodded. My hands trembled slightly on my lap, but inside, I felt a strange calm. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I was ready. At exactly 3 p.m., Daniel and I walked into the living room. It was full. Aunt Grace and Uncle Robert sat together. Lucas leaned against the fireplace. Cousins Margie and Helen from Portland were there too. My mother sat in the center, in the armchair by the fire, a jade silk scarf draped over her shoulders like an invisible crown. Every eye turned toward me as I entered, not one smile. "Oh, Samantha," my mother said with feigned surprise. "You came? I thought you were too busy to care about family." I didn't respond, just pulled up a chair and Saturday. Daniel stood behind me, opening his case but keeping the documents inside. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Vivian, you called us all here. What's this about? Seem serious." My mother clasped her hands, her face pained. "I don't know how to start, but I can't stay silent anymore. Samantha," she's not herself. Aunt Grace leaned in. "What do you mean?" "For the past year, she's been spending recklessly. There are strange debts in her name. I've seen her wandering the house at night, talking to herself. And lately, she's accused me of stealing, of forging documents. I don't know what to do." Cousin Helen looked at me, half sympathetic, half doubtful. "Samantha, is that true?" I remained silent. Daniel placed a steady hand on my shoulder. I nodded once. "Mrs. Clark," Daniel began, his voice clear and professional. "I'm Daniel Harris, Samantha's attorney. We're here today to clarify some matters you've just heard. But first, I'd like to share some documents." He opened the case, pulled out color-printed statements, and placed them neatly in front of each relative. "These are joint account records under both names, Samantha and Vivian. You'll notice multiple large transfers into an account solely under Vivian's name, without Samantha's consent or legal authorization. No one spoke. My mother's face paled slightly. Daniel continued. We've worked with the bank, and their legal department confirmed the signatures on these transactions do not match Samantha's verified signature. A handwriting expert issued a written conclusion to that effect. He pulled out another stack of papers, passing them to each person. Aunt Grace took hers, staring hard. This can't be, she whispered. And here, Daniel continued, handing over a notarized will, is the original will left by Gerald Clark, Samantha's father. This copy was preserved by attorney Richard Coleman with full legal verification. I looked at my mother. She didn't blink. She didn't retract a word. She just pressed her lips together, clutching the silk scarf on her shoulder as if it were the last piece of power she still held. Lucas stepped away from the fireplace, examining the papers. You really transferred the entire house into your name? Without telling Samantha? My mother shot to her feet. I did it to protect her. She's not capable of handling property that large. Do you know she once lost her car at the supermarket? Another time she called me crying that she couldn't find her wallet. Turned out she'd put it in the freezer. I lifted my head, replying evenly. You know the wallet ended up in the freezer because you put it there, don't you? And the car, you drove it away without telling me. The air in the room grew thick. Aunt Grace glanced at Uncle Robert in confusion. Cousin Margie flipped through the pages again and again. Lucas remained standing, his face heavy with disappointment. Daniel tilted his head slightly, then spoke. If necessary, we're prepared to present all of this in court. But Samantha wanted her family to hear the truth first. No one wants to take this legal, if it can be resolved, with honesty and fairness. My mother clasped her hands tightly, muttering through clenched teeth. She's making this up. I met her eyes. I'm not making anything up. I'm reclaiming what's mine, and if you keep using family as witnesses for your lies, I'll take this as far as it needs to go. The room fell silent. Outside, wind rustled the trees, whispering like voices no one could understand. Nobody spoke. But in the eyes of those who had once believed my mother without question, cracks had begun to form. And in that silence, I had all I needed, the silence of people finally asking themselves how long they had been deceived. After the family meeting, my mother barely spoke to me for 2 days. She moved through the house more quietly than usual, no longer scolding or performing her accidental loud remarks for others to overhear. But her eyes were different, the eyes of someone storing energy for a counterattack. On Tuesday morning, I woke early to prepare documents for Daniel when I heard a crash from the living room. The sound of glass shattering, then faint groans. I ran down to find my mother lying on her side on the carpet, one hand on her chest, face pale, whispering. My chest, tightening, can't breathe. Call an ambulance. I froze for several seconds. What I felt wasn't fear, it was a cold suspicion. The fall looked too neat. The broken glass lay in one corner, not a single drop of water spilled. Her pose on the rug looked staged, her face performed. But I still dialed 911. When the ambulance came, she was lifted onto the stretcher, frail as if she were leaving the world. She said only one thing to me before the doors closed. I hope I don't die and you feel nothing. I didn't answer. I stood there, watching the ambulance disappear around the bend, then called Daniel. He picked up almost instantly. I told him what had happened. What hospital? Street Mary, on 8th Street. I know a doctor there. I'll reach out. You stay home and don't react yet. 3 hours later, Daniel called back. I answered while sitting at the kitchen window, holding a mug of cold tea. Dr. David Whitman is handling her admission. I worked with him back when I was in the prosecutor's office. He confirmed there's no sign of a heart attack or any cardiac issue. EKG, cardiac enzymes, blood pressure, all normal. I exhaled. So she'll be discharged soon? Either tonight or tomorrow morning. But there's something else, something bigger. His voice dropped. I asked about her old medical records. Whitman checked the archives. Do you remember 12 years ago the emergency call when she claimed a fractured hip? I didn't respond. My entire body went still. The report shows no fracture. Imaging concluded it was a soft tissue injury, a minor bruise on her left hip. No surgery required. The doctor's note clearly said, recommend rest for 3 to 5 days, no special care needed. My hand clenched around the road. Cup, the other pressed against my stomach to keep myself from screaming. You're sure? I have the scanned file in my email. I'll print it and add it to the legal packet. I dropped my head onto the table. Inside my chest, there was no more rage, only a vast hollow opening up. 12 years. I had turned down every internship in New York. Sold most of my books, packed my things, left my dorm mid-semester. I cried on the flight back to Oregon, convinced my mother couldn't walk, couldn't live alone, couldn't even eat without me. And it had all been for a bruise not needing even a bandage. That evening, she came home at 8 p.m., brought back by Uncle Robert. She stepped slowly out of the car, leaning on his shoulder, walking with a limp like someone who'd escaped death. I opened the door for her, catching a flicker of doubt in Robert's eyes. She said the doctors weren't sure, told her to take it easy, don't let her stress. I nodded, thanked him, then went inside. My mother sank onto the sofa, stroking a cushion, eyes fixed not on me but the window. I thought I wasn't going to make it, truly. I poured her water, set it down. Dr. Whitman already sent the results to my lawyer. She turned to me, eyes flashing, though her voice stayed calm. You always trust outsiders over your own mother. I trust data, records, and my own memory. She said nothing. The room stayed silent for a long time. Then she stood, took her glass, and walked upstairs with the gait of someone recovering from a grave illness. But her door didn't close all the way. I saw her silhouette by the window, phone at her ear, voice low. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the play wasn't over. She didn't know how to lose. And if pity wouldn't bring me down, she would find another weapon. I sat at the dining table, resting my hand on the documents Daniel had left. In my mind, retreat was no longer an option. I was preparing for the next move, and this time no fall reel or staged would stop me. 2 days after her return from the hospital, Lucas called unexpectedly. His tone was different, still low but without the distance from before. Samantha, I need to see you. It's important. I'm near Uncle Robert's storage shed. Can you come? I hung up, grabbed my coat, and drove right away. A strange certainty sat in me, as if the final pieces were waiting to be revealed. The shed was at the far end of Robert's yard, by the old wooden fence. The concrete walls were stained, the metal roof faded. When I arrived, Lucas was crouched beside a large wooden trunk surrounded by dusty files. He looked up, tense. I found this while clearing out. Old papers of Gerald's. Looks like someone meant to hide them. He handed me a folder bound with a brittle rubber band. My hands shook as I opened it. On the first page, I recognized my father's handwriting. A will, handwritten, witnessed by 2 neighbors and signed by attorney Richard Coleman. I bent closer, reading line by line. My father had divided his estate into 2 parts. One, a savings fund for my mother. The other, the house and all the surrounding land split equally between us. The final line etched itself into me. This is the home my daughter grew up in. Though I cannot stay with her for all her life, I want Samantha to always have a place to return, to begin again, to live as herself. I gripped the paper, eyes burning. Lucas looked at me, guilt plain. I'm sorry for doubting you before. I just couldn't believe your mom would do what you said. I shook my head. I understand. I'll stand with you, no matter where this goes. I hugged the file to my chest, feeling like a piece of myself long lost had finally been returned. When I got home, my mother was in the living room, watching the news. She didn't look at me as I walked in. I placed the folder in front of her. "You should read this." She stared at me, then opened it. Her eyes darted across the lines, her face going pale, then flushing red as the blood rushed too fast. "Where did you get this?" "Lucas found it in Robert's shed. It's been there more than a decade." She slammed the file onto the table, sprang to her feet. "I don't need to see that. It should have been burned long ago." I stood firm. "Because it keeps you from taking the whole house, right? I did everything because I had no choice. You think it was easy being trapped here with someone like you?" I waited. "You think I was happy losing my husband, then watching my daughter plan to leave me too? If I hadn't kept you here that way, you would have abandoned me." I asked quietly, "Did it ever occur to you that keeping someone with guilt isn't love?" She laughed coldly. "If I hadn't, would you have come back? Would you have stayed?" "I stayed because I thought you needed me. I stayed because I believed losing Dad so soon meant I had to make it up to you. But the truth is, you didn't need me. You needed someone to control. I raised you for 20 years, and I paid with the next 12. Does that sound balanced to you?" She clenched her fists, eyes blazing. "If I hadn't kept you here, I would have lost everything. The property, the reputation, the sympathy of the family. I had to keep you here so I could stay in control. I had to." I looked at her quietly, not angry, not trembling, only seeing a desperate woman, twisting the truth out of fear of being left with nothing. "I'm not a child anymore. You no longer have the right to decide anything for me. From today on, my life is not in your hands." She didn't respond. She just stood there, her shoulders trembling, then turned away and walked toward the stairs without looking back. I stood in the living room, the place that had once been the heart of our home, once filled with mother-daughter dinners, rainy afternoons, listening to the radio, laughter that I now realized was nothing more than background noise for a play. Now I felt no fear, no debt. I was standing on my own 2 feet. And that, for me, was enough to begin again. I changed every lock on a Thursday morning while my mother was at the senior center. The locksmith, a man named Gerald in his 60s, didn't ask questions. He worked silently and carefully, then handed me the new sets of keys. His voice was raspy, as though he'd just woken up from a long night. "From now on, only the people you allow can come into this house. That's how it should be." I nodded, thanked him. My chest wasn't as light as I'd once imagined, not because of regret, but because, after all those years, that simple act had become my final declaration that I was no longer controlled. I moved all of my mother's belongings into the living room: clothes, handbags, perfumes, even the vitamin pill box she often forgot by the sink. I arranged them carefully, leaving nothing out. On the bed, I placed a handwritten note. "This room is your private space until you arrange new housing. From now on, the upstairs belongs to me alone." That afternoon, when she came home, her old key no longer worked. I heard the turn of the lock, the retry, then silence. I stood in the upstairs hallway, waiting. The door opened only when I pressed the button inside. She stepped in, clutching her purse straps tightly, her eyes now burning with anger instead of coldness. "What are you doing?" "Resetting boundaries. You're kicking me out of the house." "I'm dividing space. This house is shared property, and I won't let anyone, even you, cross the line again." She looked around, seeing her things piled into the living room. Her face darkened as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Then she whispered, "You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I was past being afraid of threats like that. 3 weeks later, she packed her things and moved to Aunt Margaret's house in Arizona. No one in that family said goodbye to me. She left a thick envelope under my door. Inside were a phone bill, 2 credit card statements, and a scribbled note. Let's see how you manage when no one's left to put up with you. I burned them in the fireplace, not out of revenge, just to end it. A year later, I reopened a small architecture studio on the corner where an old bookstore used to be. The space was less than 400 square feet, with dark wooden floors, white painted walls, and a wide glass window that welcomed sunlight all day. I hung my drawings on the walls, set balsa wood models on the shelves, placed a lavender pot by the window. Everything was small, balanced enough. In the mornings, I taught model building classes to underprivileged kids. Some had never touched wood glue before. Some thought drafting pens were just for coloring. They laughed easily, asked naive questions, and whenever I looked into their eyes, I saw the clarity I'd once lost. One of them, little Lily, once asked after class, "Miss, why do you always smile when you're cutting paper?" "I thought grown-ups were always stressed at work," I answered gently, "because this is what I chose. No one forced me." In the evenings, I came home, cooked for myself, turned on the lights the way I liked, played music not to please anyone else. I hung terracotta-colored curtains in the kitchen window, the ones my mother had called too messy. On the table sat the flowers Elaine brought every Friday when she came by with Murphy. The first small gathering I hosted after a year happened in spring. Warm string lights hung from the porch, a simple table set with lemon tarts, vegetable salad, honey-glazed salmon. Daniel, Elaine, Lucas, and a few neighbors came. No one wore fancy clothes, no flashy party. Just a gentle evening, steady laughter, eyes that no longer carried suspicion. When I raised my glass, I stood, looking around at them. "Freedom," I said slowly, "isn't something my mother gave me. It's something I had to claim for myself, piece by piece." No one clapped, but each of them touched their glass to mine with knowing eyes. No one asked about my mother. No one brought up the past. But I knew they understood. That night, after cleaning up, Lily and her mom stopped by. They carried a small, framed watercolor painting. In it was a tiny house with its door wide open, warm light spilling out, and by the doorway sat a woman cutting paper, scissors in hand, smiling. Beneath it, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Home is where you choose, not where you're forced to return." I hung it beside my desk. And sometimes, in quiet evenings when I saw the porch lights reflected in the glass, I asked myself, do we always have to cut ties completely to call it freedom? Or can keeping a distance clear enough, safe enough, also be a way of protecting ourselves? Maybe there isn't one answer for everyone, but I'd found mine, and I was living it every day. My story didn't end with slammed doors or silent tears. It ended with a silence deep enough to hear myself again, and wide enough to let others into my life with genuine respect. If you're still listening, I want to ask you something. In a toxic relationship, especially when it comes from your own blood, do you believe cutting ties completely is the only way to protect yourself? Or can setting firm boundaries, a safe distance, also be a kind of freedom that keeps your heart from hardening? I don't have all the answers, but I believe everyone has the right to ask that question for themselves and to find the answer that truly fits their own journey. If my story stirs something in you, if it reminds you of a moment in your own life, share it with me. I read every word, every line, and I cherish them all. And if you want to keep walking with me through stories of family, choices, and growth told plainly but truthfully, subscribe to this channel. Because life is a series of crossroads, and maybe the next story will touch a turn in your own journey.